The wind howls across the cliffs. Waves crash like they're trying to erase the island itself. And in the fading light of a stormy night, a little girl stands still, clutching a weathered red collar. She doesn't cry. She doesn't scream. She only whispers, "Roscoe can't go home without me." No one believed her. No one saw the dog. But by morning, exactly where she pointed, rescuers found the remains of a boy, missing for 20 years. And beside him, a dog guarding him, still wearing a red collar. Some things children see adults never dare to. Some souls don't find peace until a child brave enough listens to the echo. The echo on the island. A haunting emotional mystery you won't forget. Hit subscribe to follow more powerful, chilling, and heart-touching stories from us. The camera opens from high above, slicing through fog so thick it feels alive. A rugged, wind-blasted island juts out from the Atlantic like a wounded beast. Waves crash against blackened cliffs, relentless, like they've been trying to swallow the land whole for centuries. There are no colors, only muted grays, sick blues, and the dull glow of a dying sun. A low, gravelly narration begins, not heroic, not warm, but worn as though it has told this story too many times and never found peace. They say the sea doesn't forget, that every cry swallowed by the waves is echoed back someday. A flicker of static. An old camcorder clip jolts to life, grainy, dated, time-stamped from 20 years ago. The footage trembles as a child's voice yells in the distance, indistinct. The camera pans too fast, loses focus. Then suddenly a brief, almost imperceptible blur, a dog chestnut brown streaking across the jagged shoreline. Around its neck, a red collar flapping violently in the wind. Then just as quickly, static, quickly, cut to black. Now the sound of a ferry horn cutting the silence like a blade. The scene shifts. A new shot, wide angle, colder now, modern day. A ferry crests through the fog, heading toward the same island. But it feels smaller now. Less mythical, less forgiving. Inside an old Volvo station wagon, a little girl presses her forehead to the fogged-up glass. Emma, 7 years old, eyes far too tired for someone her age. She clutches a worn-out stuffed rabbit against her chest like it's the last soft thing in the world. Her parents, Dr. Caleb and Dr. Miriam Holt, sit in silence. They don't argue, but the tension is thick, brittle. Like one wrong sentence might shatter them completely. Boxes fill the back seat. Labeled in hurried handwriting, research. Fragile Emma's clothes, field logs. A sign crests into view, "Welcome to Briar Sound, Pop 146. The ferry docks with a groan. Cut to the family's arrival at the island house, a weathered, colonial-style home half sunken into the hill. The paint is flaking windows smeared with salt. Wind chimes rattle like bones. Emma's footsteps are slow as she walks up the gravel path. She pauses, staring at the crooked porch swing that creaks lazily in the wind. Inside, the house breathes like something alive. Floorboards moan. The air carries a scent of mothballs, damp wood, and something else, something faintly metallic, like rust or blood. The walls are lined with books, old black and white photos, and a grandfather clock that hasn't worked in decades. Her parents busy themselves with unpacking, avoiding eye contact. Trying to act like this is a normal move. But it's not. Emma walks room to room, silent. She opens a door and steps into what was once a study. Dust motes dance in the light. On the shelf, a faded photograph, an old man, her grandfather, standing next to a lighthouse. Beside him, a child. The face is too blurred to recognize, but in the child's arms is a dog, chestnut-colored. Red collar. She doesn't mention it, just walks away. That night, the wind howls. Emma lays curled on a thin mattress, staring up at the ceiling. Her stuffed rabbit is tucked under her chin. The walls creak with every gust. Downstairs, Caleb and Miriam argue in hushed tones over whether the internet is working, whether there's enough data to send field notes. They don't notice the hush that's fallen upstairs. Suddenly, a bark. Not loud, not close, but unmistakable. Emma bolts upright. She looks to the window. Outside, the fog presses against the glass like a living thing. A tree sways. A shape moves too quick to track. Was it a trick of the wind? A branch, or... She stares. The hair on her arm stands up. She presses a hand to the window. Nothing but silence now. She waits. The wind shifts again. And then another bark, softer, this time almost like a whisper. Distant, but deliberate. She whispers under her breath, barely audible. Roscoe. Cut to the kitchen. A light flickers. The grandfather clock ticks once, then goes silent again. Fade to black. The voice returns, low haunted. They say children hear what adults won't. That some echoes aren't meant for grown ears. End of segment. The sun hangs low, bleeding orange into the fog as Emma barrels up the front steps of the old house, cheeks flushed from running shoes soaked in seawater and sand. She bursts through the screen door like a bullet and skids into the living room where her parents are unpacking a weathered crate of research equipment. Mom, Dad, she calls out, her voice bright too. Bright for this house, for this island. I was playing with Roscoe. Miriam looks up puzzled. Who's Roscoe's sweetie? Emma is beaming, eyes wide with wonder. A dog. A really nice one. He has chestnut fur and a red collar. He found me near the cliffs. He ran right up and barked like he knew me. There's a beat of silence, then Caleb chuckles, brushing dust off an old microscope. Oh yeah. What kind of dog was he? Emma shrugs. I don't know. Just Roscoe. Miriam kneels beside her, smoothing damp hair from her daughter's forehead. Are you sure you weren't just imagining him? There aren't many pets on the island. I'm sure Emma says serious now. He played with me. He showed me something. He was real. The parents share a glance, the kind that says humor her, she's just adjusting. Caleb gives her a smile, distracted. Well, if you see him again, tell him to come inside next time. Emma doesn't laugh. She turns, walks upstairs without another word. Night falls. The wind outside scrapes against the windows like nails. Emma sits cross-legged on the hardwood floor of her bedroom, crayons scattered around her like spilled secrets. She draws furiously, a trance overtaking her fingers. One sheet after another. Her eyes never blink. By the time Miriam walks in to check on her, the floor is littered with drawings. Crayon lines thick, urgent. Not childlike, intentional. Each picture shows the same dog, Roscoe. Brown coat, red collar. In some, he's walking beside her. In others, he's standing alone, ears perked, facing the sea. But one picture drawn in black and navy blue shows Roscoe leading Emma to the edge of the cliff, his paw lifted, pointing down toward the ocean below. Miriam crouches slowly, picking up that particular drawing. The cliffs in the image are jagged, almost grotesque in their sharpness. And at the base beneath the waves is a shadowy form, human-shaped. Emma, what's this? She asks gently. Emma's voice, his distant eyes still focused on the next drawing. Roscoe showed me. Someone's down there. Miriam stiffens. Someone? A man, Emma says. He was cold. Roscoe didn't bark. He just stared. I think Roscoe wanted me to tell someone. Miriam's hand tightens around the drawing. Sweetheart, you didn't go near the cliff, did you? I was with Roscoe, Emma says. He kept me safe. Caleb enters behind her, holding his tablet. What's going on? Miriam shows him the drawings without a word. He studies them for a moment, then lets out a sigh. She's just working through the stress, he says. This move, the isolation, it's how she's processing. But Miriam doesn't answer. Her eyes are fixed on the cliff in the drawing. The detail, the scale. It's not something a child should be able to recreate unless she's seen it. And then, like punctuation to her fear, something flashes outside the window. A beam of light sweeping across the sea. They turn toward it. From the upstairs window, they can just barely make out a faint flickering glow near the coastline, erratic, too far to distinguish. Then another. Like flashlight beams, crisscrossing over the dark waves. Someone's out there, Miriam whispers. Cut to the shoreline. A local search party navigates the rocky coast. They call out names, no one answers. The wind swallows every syllable before it leaves their mouths. A rescue dog barks, suddenly alert, then takes off down a craggy path. A moment later, a flashlight beam freezes on a shape tangled in seaweed and rock at the bottom of the cliff. A body, and next to it, another shape. A dog, chestnut fur matted with salt and blood. A red collar glinting under the beam. The dog is dead, but it's draped over the man's chest, as if shielding him, even in death. Back in the house, Emma stirs in her sleep. The wind howls louder. The crayon rolls off the edge of the nightstand. Fade to black. A voice faint now, barely a breath. Roscoe's not lost. He's waiting. The next morning arrives like a bruise. Purple clouds hanging low, light slow to rise. The waves outside slam against the rocks, as if disturbed, as if some truth beneath the surface has been broken open. The doorbell rings. No one ever rings a bell here. Miriam opens the door to find a uniformed officer, Sheriff Lorne Hale, a man weathered by more than just storms. Behind him, the sea is still snarling restless. "I need to speak with you about your daughter," he says, voice tight. They sit in the kitchen. Emma is upstairs drawing quietly, humming something only she understands. Lorne pulls a small evidence bag from his coat and places it gently on the table. Inside is a collar, faded, frayed at the edges, soaked in seawater, but unmistakable bright red, the clasp rusted, and etched into a tarnished nameplate. Roscoe. Miriam stares at it as if it might move. Her fingers tremble when she picks it up, turning the plate toward the morning light. It's not a coincidence. It's not imaginary. The name matches exactly. "She told us his name," Miriam whispers. Before this, Lorne leans forward. "I don't know what you believe in, Dr. Holt. Ghosts, fate, energy. But your daughter described this dog before we ever found him. That doesn't just happen." Caleb stands rigid in the corner. "With all due respect, Sheriff, kids imagine things. Maybe Emma overheard someone in town talking about the search, the missing hiker, the dog. The brain fills in the gaps." Lorne shakes his head. "The man we found, the hiker, his name was Derek Kilpatrick, from Ottawa. According to his family, he was traveling alone. No dog. No one on the island has seen a dog like that in over a decade. You understand what I'm saying?" Silence. Then Miriam asks, barely above a whisper, "So where did the dog come from?" Lorne doesn't answer. He pulls another folder from his bag, old and brittle. He lays it on the table and flips through the pages. Missing person reports, yellowed photographs, scanned newsprint. He stops on one image. A boy, no older than 9. Messy hair, wide grin. One arm wrapped around a familiar-looking dog, Roscoe. Same eyes, same fur, same collar. This photo is from 2004, Lorne says. Boy's name was Samuel Greaves. Went missing with his parents. Whole family vanished during a sailing trip. The boat was found wrecked off the north side of this island. No bodies were ever recovered. Miriam leans in closer. But this dog Roscoe was his. Yes, that was in the police report. Samuel and Roscoe were inseparable. Witnesses remember them running around the harbor town days before they left. She stares at the image as if it's whispering something only she can hear. Something just beneath comprehension. Caleb scoffs softly, tension building in his jaw. "This is getting ridiculous. You're saying the same dog from 20 years ago just showed up again? That our daughter played with it? Led her to a body?" Lorne levels his gaze at Caleb. "I'm saying the dog you saw in those drawings is the same dog we found on that cliff. And I'm saying your daughter somehow knew. I've been on this island 22 years, Dr. Holt. I've seen storms break apart homes, whales beach themselves for no reason. Birds vanish in the sky. But this feels different." Upstairs, Emma draws another picture. It's of a lighthouse, cracked, leaning slightly. Its light reaching out not into the night, but into the sea. And next to it, a boy, his hand resting on Roscoe's head. Miriam walks up. Moments later, pauses in the doorway. Emma looks up. Her voice is quiet. "Mommy, Roscoe says Samuel misses his parents." Miriam kneels. "Who's Samuel?" Emma blinks. "The boy who had Roscoe before me." The hairs on Miriam's arms rise. She forces her voice steady. "How do you know his name, sweetie?" "He told me." A silence so dense it nearly cracks. Emma continues drawing. "He's not mad. He just wants someone to know he was here." Downstairs, Lorne continues flipping through the file, lost in the details of a 20-year-old tragedy. Caleb pours himself coffee, hands shaking. He watches the steam rise, pretending it's just the cold making him uneasy. But something has changed in this house, in this island, in their daughter. And though he doesn't admit it out loud, part of him, some deep animal part, knows that the moment Roscoe's name was spoken, something ancient stirred. Something waiting to be heard again. End of segment. The days blur. Time on the island doesn't move forward. It loops like tide water swirling around the same rocks. Emma no longer asks about Roscoe. She doesn't need to. She sees him. It starts with laughter, faint at first, a high, fluttering sound like leaves rustling in wind. Then clearer, real, too real. The kind of laugh that makes mothers freeze in doorways, unsure if what they heard was joy or something else entirely. Miriam begins noticing Emma slipping outside more often. Not with her parents, not with permission, and never with fear. Always alone. She finds her one morning in the woods, near the cliff path, shoes, muddy hair damp with dew. Emma is standing in a shaft of pale light, giggling and turning in circles, her arms extended as if someone is holding her hands. She's talking to the air, listening, responding. Miriam watches from behind a tree heart, knocking against her ribs. Not that way, Roscoe, Emma says. That's too steep, you silly dog. She squats as if petting something at her feet, then looks up sharply as if someone called her. Okay, I'm coming. And she runs fast, light-footed, like she's chasing a friend just around the bend. But there's no one there. No paw prints, no snapped branches, just the echo of her laughter bleeding through the trees. That night, Miriam can't sleep. The house feels colder, the wind meaner. She stands at Emma's bedroom door and watches her sleep, half expecting Roscoe to materialize out of the shadows, curl up beside her like a guardian ghost. She doesn't believe in spirits, not really. But this house is built on something more than rock and timber. It's built on forgetting. The next time it happens, it's raining. Hard. Sheets of it. Emma slips out the back door in her pajamas barefoot, holding her stuffed rabbit like a torch. She walks straight into the downpour. Miriam wakes up with a start, mother's instinct, that invisible wire snapping inside her. She runs outside barefoot too, calling her daughter's name into the gale. She finds her in the old cemetery behind the church, ruined stones so worn by salt and time, most names erased. Emma stands still among the graves, soaked to the bone, rabbit clutched to her chest, blinking up at the sky like she's waiting for lightning. Miriam grabs her, wraps her in trembling arms. What are you doing out here? Baby, what are you doing? Emma's voice is so calm it terrifies her. Roscoe said this is where someone's waiting. Miriam pulls back, brushing wet hair from her daughter's face. Waiting for what? Emma just looks past her toward the edge of the graveyard, where the mist curls thickest. To be found. Later, when Emma's asleep, Miriam tells Caleb everything. Her voice shakes. She's not asking him to believe her. She just needs to say it out loud. He doesn't yell, doesn't argue. He disappears into the attic. She finds him there, an hour later, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a mold-stained box cracked open in front of him. Inside his grandfather's journals. Dozens of them, leather-bound, yellowed. Caleb flips through the pages like a man digging through his own buried memories. He used to tell me stories, Caleb mutters. After the strokes, after Grandma died. I thought they were nonsense. But he kept going on about a boy and a dog. Said he'd seen them walking the cliffs. Said they only came after storms. Miriam kneels beside him. He shows her the pages. Shaky handwriting. Sentences that run off the edge. Frantic loops and crossed-out thoughts. Saw the child again. Near the bluff. He looked straight at me. Same dog as last time. Red collar, chestnut fur. Not a dream. No one believes me. The doctor says I'm hallucinating grief. But the child is real. And he's calling. Caleb's voice cracks. I left him in this house. Alone. Writing to himself, seeing things. And now, Emma's seeing them too. Miriam turns the page. A drawing crude but unmistakable. The boy again. And beside him, the dog. Samuel and Roscoe, she whispers. Downstairs, the house creaks. Outside, the rain stops. But something lingers in the air, a pressure like a held breath. And somewhere far off, not quite real. The sound of a dog barking, once clear, sad and impossible. End of segment. It begins with a game of hide and seek. Not one she tells anyone she's playing, but one she's invited into. By what no one knows. But Emma knows the rules. Don't ask questions. Don't tell grown-ups. Follow the whispers in the wind. The forest behind the house feels different that day, like it's holding something in. The path Emma takes isn't one she's seen before, but her feet move like they've walked it 1,000 times. The light filters strangely through the branches, dappling the ground in shapes that almost look like footprints. She steps over roots, past moss-covered stones, until she reaches a hollow tree with bark peeled back like broken skin. At its base, half buried beneath wet leaves. In time, something catches her eye. A wooden box, old, rotting, fragile, but real. She doesn't hesitate. She digs it out with her bare hands, splinters snagging her palms. The lid groans as she pries it open. Inside a rusted wristwatch frozen at 3:17, a scrap of fabric once white, now yellowed and fraying at the edges, and a folded piece of paper brittle as dried leaves. Emma opens it carefully. It's a drawing. Crayon. Child's hand. A boy, smiling. And beside him, Roscoe. The red collar is unmistakable. She doesn't scream. She doesn't run. She just whispers like she's thanking someone not quite there. I found it. Back at the house, Miriam watches her daughter burst in muddy and wild-eyed, clutching the box like treasure. She listens as Emma spills everything where she found it, what was inside. She holds the drawing up like a banner, and Miriam believes her. Not because it makes sense, but because the drawing matches the one Emma did 3 days earlier. Same boy, same smile, same dog, same angle of the lighthouse behind them, right down to the crooked weather vane. And Emma had never seen this drawing before today. Miriam calls for Caleb. He comes in from the shed dust on his hands, frown already forming. Emma thrusts the box toward him. I didn't make this one. Somebody else did. But Roscoe showed me where it was. Caleb stares at the contents. His face goes still when he sees the watch. He lifts it slowly, brushes dirt from the face. This was my grandfather's, he murmurs. This exact model. I remember he used to tap it when it stopped like it would come back to life. Miriam's voice is low, urgent. Caleb, she found it buried, in the woods, next to a tree I've never even seen before. How would she know that? He looks from the box to the drawing, then to his daughter, and something inside him slams shut. It's a coincidence, he says. Too fast, too firm. Miriam doesn't back down. You think she staged this, faked the age of that paper, forged your grandfather's watch? I think she's scared. I think we're feeding it. I think we're creating a feedback loop, paranoia pattern recognition, mass suggestion. She's not a lab experiment, Miriam snaps. She's your daughter. And she's not imagining this. But Caleb's already walking away. Miriam turns to Emma. Show me everything. Where you found it. What else Roscoe told you. That night, after Emma's asleep, Miriam begins combing through old video files on her laptop, field footage, family videos, clips they'd taken since arriving on the island. She's not sure what she's looking for. Maybe something comforting, something sane. Instead, she finds him. It's subtle, just a flicker at first. In a video of Emma playing in the backyard, the camera shakes as Caleb zooms in on a butterfly she's chasing. For a split second in the corner of the frame, a brown blur darts behind a tree. She freezes it, zooms. It's not clear, could be anything. But it's the right size, the right shape, and there's a glint of red. She scrubs through another file. A time-lapse of the fog rolling in over the cliffs. The trees sway, the ocean churns. And then halfway through, a figure at the edge. A dog, sitting perfectly still facing the sea. Gone 2 seconds later, she plays it again. The timestamp is before Emma ever said the name Roscoe aloud. Her heart stutters. She opens more clips. Ones they don't remember filming. Static lines across the screen. Date codes wrong. Glitches. But the dog Roscoe is always in the periphery. Like a ghost who doesn't know he's dead. Or doesn't care. Caleb walks in while she's on the last clip. What are you doing? He asks, dry. Miriam turns the screen to him, points. He watches, frowns, then scoffs. You're seeing what you want to see. No, she says quietly. I'm seeing what's there. He walks out. But that night, long after Miriam's asleep, Caleb sits alone in the hallway. Laptop on his lap. Rewatching the clips. And when Roscoe appears again, tail wagging, mouth open in a silent bark, Caleb slams the lid shut and whispers to the dark. This isn't possible. But the island doesn't care about what's possible, only about what's waiting. End of segment. The day begins with a sky that looks bruised. Clouds hang low and heavy, casting the island in a dim, washed-out light. There's no wind, just stillness. The kind that feels staged, like the world is holding its breath. They go to the beach as a family for the first time in weeks. Caleb suggests it, maybe out of guilt, maybe to prove something. He insists on normalcy, like it's something you can walk back into if you just pretend hard enough. Miriam agrees reluctantly. She packs a small lunch. Emma wears her yellow raincoat, the one with the faded bunny patch on the back. She carries nothing but her stuffed rabbit and a silence so profound It almost vibrates. They walk the shoreline in near silence. The beach is strewn with driftwood and sea glass, half-buried secrets of the tide. The cliffs rise on their left, imposing jagged layered in sediment like scars in stone. Emma trails behind, watching. She stops near a curve in the coast where the beach narrows and the rocks jut out in cruel, unnatural angles. She kneels in the sand, places a hand down, then stands and turns to her parents. This is where the water took him. Miriam freezes mid-step. Took who, baby? Emma points at the cliff face. The boy. He was trying to come back. But the waves were too strong. Caleb's face tightens. Emma. Roscoe showed me, she says. She walks toward the cliff without waiting for permission. Her hand brushes the rocks like she's searching for a memory etched in stone. They didn't mean to leave. The boat broke. He swam to shore, but no one heard him. Roscoe stayed with him until the end. Miriam rushes to her, kneels beside her, trying to search her eyes for fiction, but finds only knowing. Caleb looks away, jaw locked. That's when Emma turns, slightly narrows her eyes at a jagged outcrop near the base of the cliff, half hidden by kelp and erosion. She walks toward it, slipping through gaps in the rock like she's done it before. He's still here, she whispers. And then she stops, dead still. She points at a slab of stone. Miriam approaches and sees it. A shape, not natural. A bone, long, human, half buried beneath the sand and stone worn by decades of salt and tide. Miriam gasps. Her knees hit the sand. Caleb stumbles back, suddenly breathless. No, that's not, but it is. By nightfall, the beach is lit by floodlights. Yellow tape flutters in the sea breeze. Local authorities move in with grim faces, whispering to each other behind clipboards and crime scene markers. Sheriff Hale stands apart, eyes locked on the dig site. The coroner's team exhumes what's left of a skeleton badly decomposed, but intact enough for identification. And beside it, buried deeper, preserved in silt and salt, lies something else. A canvas satchel. Inside, a rusted compass, a pair of broken glasses, and a photograph, sealed in wax paper. A family of 3, smiling. A boy, a mother, a father. The Greaves, the family that vanished 20 years ago. The boy in the picture is unmistakable. So is the dog. Roscoe, the red collar. The same face Emma has drawn a dozen times before she ever saw this image. Sheriff Hale brings the photograph to Miriam the next morning. She stares at it in silence for a long time, then calls Emma in. Sweetheart, she says softly. Do you know who this is? Emma nods solemn. That's Samuel. And his mom and dad. Caleb steps away like he's been slapped. You never saw that picture before, he says, more accusation than question. Emma looks at him like she doesn't understand why he's still asking. Roscoe told me their names. He wanted me to help find them. Later that day, the sheriff calls a meeting at the island's community center. A gathering of longtime locals, weathered, skeptical, stubborn. He presents the evidence. The remains, the identification, the timeline. Whispers ripple through the crowd. He was just a boy. I thought they sank miles from here. Was it an accident or something else? And then someone speaks the unspoken. What about the girl? The one who found him. How the hell did she know? They all look toward the back of the room where Miriam stands holding Emma's hand. Emma doesn't flinch under the scrutiny. She meets their gaze like she's older than all of them. Sheriff Hale steps in. Whatever brought this to light, it brought peace. The boy's body is home. The family can have a funeral. That matters. But not everyone is soothed. Mrs. Latch, the oldest woman on the island, speaks in a gravelly voice. There's things on this island we stopped listening to. Children see them. Animals sense them. The rest of us, we forget. On purpose. Silence falls. And for the first time, no one laughs at her. That night, Emma stands at her window watching the sea. The wind howls. The cliffs far in the distance glow briefly with reflected moonlight like they're remembering. She presses her hand to the glass and whispers, "You're not lost anymore." End of segment. The kitchen is too quiet. It's late, well past midnight, but no one in the house is asleep. The wind has picked up, howling against the windows like a warning. Rain taps the roof in uneven rhythms, like a message in Morse no one can quite decipher. Emma is sitting at the kitchen table wrapped in a blanket, her rabbit clutched tightly in her lap. Her feet barely touch the floor. Her eyes are red from crying. Across the room, Caleb paces. His voice isn't loud, but it cuts like a blade. This ends now. Miriam stands near the sink, arms crossed, face tight. You don't get to decide that by yourself. She needs help, he says, gesturing toward Emma. Real help. Not folklore, not ghost stories. A child should not be wandering graveyards in the middle of the night, talking to dead dogs. Emma flinches. Miriam's voice rises. She's not imagining it, Caleb. You've seen the videos. You've read the journals. You saw the collar, the photos. I saw coincidence, he interrupts. I saw a grieving family who made their daughter the center of a myth. Don't do that. No, I will do that. Because if we keep playing along with this fantasy, if we keep telling her it's all real, we are not helping her. We're enabling something that could hurt her. Emma's small voice slices through the storm of argument. He's not a fantasy. They both turn. She's standing now, blanket falling from her shoulders. Roscoe's real. He talks to me. He showed me where Samuel was. He told me the island still has secrets. He's not done. Caleb runs a hand down his face. You're 7 years old. You shouldn't be carrying the weight of this place. Emma's voice shakes. I'm not carrying it. I'm listening. That word listening lands like thunder. Miriam takes a step forward, lowering to her knees to meet her daughter's eyes. Emma, why do you think Roscoe picked you? Emma stares past her toward the hallway. Because I believed him. Because I didn't pretend not to hear. Caleb shakes his head violently. This is insane. This island has gotten into your head. Both of you. He grabs his coat. We're leaving. Tomorrow. First boat off this rock. Emma's face collapses. No. Caleb is already walking down the hall. Emma follows him, pleading. Daddy, no. We can't leave. He needs me. He spins around. Roscoe is dead, Emma. He's just a story now. And stories don't bleed. They don't bark. They don't... I saw him, she screams. In the mirror. Silence. Even the wind pauses. Caleb stares. What? Emma's lip quivers. In the mirror. Upstairs. Just now. He looked right at me. He was wet. Like he came in from the storm. Miriam is already moving. Up the stairs. Down the hall. Into the bathroom. She flips on the light. The mirror is fogged from the broken vent system, but there's something else. A smear. High on the glass. Like a paw print. Muddy. Impossible. She lifts trembling fingers to touch it. Thunder cracks. The lights flicker. And then die. The entire house drops into darkness. For a moment, no one moves. Then the storm slams against the house like it's trying to tear it off the map. Wind shrieks through cracks in the walls. The old grandfather clock downstairs ticks once, then starts to chime. It hasn't worked in years. Miriam stumbles down the hallway toward Emma's room. Caleb, Emma. No answer. She finds Caleb in the living room, staring at the front door wide open, curtains billowing. He turns to her, pale. Where is she? Outside, the world has gone feral. Trees bend like they're bowing to something furious. The ocean screams just beyond the cliffs. Rain hammers sideways. Thunder pulses like a heartbeat too big for the sky. And Emma is gone. End of segment. The door is wide open. The storm is howling so loud, it feels alive, like it's screaming something in a language only the island understands. Rain slashes sideways across the porch. Wind claws at the trees. Somewhere wood groans, maybe the old dock breaking free. Or maybe the bones of the island shifting underfoot. Emma is gone. Caleb runs barefoot into the night, flashlight in hand beam, trembling with every step. Miriam follows seconds behind, boots, half-laced, heart pounding in her ears. Emma, she shouts. Emma. No answer. Just the shriek of wind and the hush of waves smashing into the cliffs like fists. Branches snap overhead. The sky rips open with lightning, and for one split second, everything glows, the trees, the house, the path. But no Emma. Caleb turns toward the forest. She's with him, he says under his breath. Miriam doesn't ask who. She already knows. They follow the trail, the one Emma walked before the one Roscoe showed her. The trees lean in like sentries. The path curves, dips, narrows. The mud grabs their feet like hands. Then Miriam sees it. Tiny prints in the earth. Barefoot. Emma's. They follow them deeper into the woods. Up ahead, movement. A flash of yellow. Caleb raises his light and shouts, Emma! Nothing. Then again, a flicker between the trees. Her raincoat soaked and trailing behind her like a ghost. They break into a run. The wind roars. Lightning cracks overhead. A tree splinters and crashes behind them, but they don't stop. The storm seems to be chasing them now, not out of anger, but urgency. Like it's trying to close a door before something escapes. They find her near the heart of the forest, standing in a clearing no one remembers being there before. She's motionless, her back to them, arms wrapped tightly around something at her chest. Caleb reaches her first, drops to his knees. Emma. Emma, look at me. She turns slowly. Her face is calm. In her hands, a red collar. Still wet, still warm. The metal tag faintly glowing in the stormlight. She looks at them wide-eyed, but not afraid. "I found it," she whispers. "Roscoe left it for me. He says he can't find his way home alone." Miriam kneels beside her. "Sweetheart, what do you mean? Where is he?" Emma glances toward the east. "The cliffs." He's waiting, at the light. Lightning explodes across the sky. And in that instant, high on the ridge, where the island's old lighthouse has stood dead for decades, a flicker, then another, a light, pulsing, alive. The beam sweeps once across the island, like a giant eye opening after a long, dreamless sleep. Miriam gasps. Caleb stares in disbelief. "That place hasn't worked since before she was born," he says. Emma starts walking, not running, just walking. As if the storm isn't there, as if the path is clear. They follow her. The climb to the lighthouse is steep, tangled with weeds and jagged stone. Every step soaked in rain and the weight of something old stirring. As they crest the final hill, the lighthouse looms over them, its windows blown out, its paint flaking in strips. But the top glows with rotating light like a heartbeat. Slow, steady. The door is ajar. Emma pushes it open. Inside, dust, mildew, rusted tools. But the staircase up is dry clean, like someone has just come through. Emma places the collar on the first step. "He doesn't need me to go any farther," she says. Then she sits cross-legged on the floor. Caleb and Miriam stand frozen, staring at the impossible light above, spinning and sweeping over the island, calling something home. Outside, the storm finally begins to quiet. But inside the lighthouse, a different silence settles, not emptiness. Completion. End of segment. The spiral staircase groans beneath their feet as Caleb and Miriam climb. The storm has quieted, but the lighthouse hums with a strange energy, like the bones of the building are holding their breath. Emma remains below, hands folded in her lap, eyes closed as though waiting for a door to open that only she can see. At the top of the stairs, a narrow hallway leads to a closed door. It shouldn't be possible. This lighthouse had been condemned for decades. Every islander knew the story, gutted by storm, sealed by rust, forgotten by time. And yet here it is, a door intact. The brass knob worn smooth from touch. Miriam reaches for it. The door creaks open. The room beyond is still. Dust motes hang frozen in slanted moonlight, streaming through a broken window. The walls are lined with fading wallpaper, water-stained and peeling. A desk sits in the center, covered in old papers, a cracked lamp, and a globe that still spins with the breeze. And on the far wall, yellowed photographs are pinned in a careful line. Family portraits, newspaper clippings, drawings. There's one photo in particular that stops both of them cold. A boy, maybe 8 or 9, grinning shyly at the camera. His arm around a large chestnut dog with a bright red collar. Roscoe. They step closer. Miriam lifts the photo gently from its nail, flipping it over. Faded pencil scrawl. Samuel plus Roscoe, 2004. Her hands begin to shake. Caleb moves to the desk and starts sifting through the papers. They're mostly water-damaged, ink smeared, but a few survive. A legal letter, typed. The header bears the seal of a law office in Halifax. This letter serves as formal notice of pending litigation. The words blur with age, but the context is clear, a wrongful accusation. Financial fraud. Land ownership dispute. Names redacted except for one. Greaves. Caleb's breath catches. He finds another page torn from a diary. "We didn't do it. I swear we didn't. They said Dad was hiding money, but he wasn't. Mom's terrified. We're leaving tomorrow. Uncle says it's safer at sea." There's a drawing beneath the entry. A small boat. 3 stick figures on board. And at the shore, one lone figure with a dog beside him waving goodbye. Miriam sits slowly on the edge of the desk. "They ran," she whispers. "They ran because no one believed them." Caleb's eyes drift back to the photograph, and the storm got them before they could clear the island. There's a long silence. Then Miriam says Roscoe swam back. "He made it." Caleb nods, and he waited. They glance around the room. It's not just a time capsule, it's a memorial. Someone kept this place untouched. Someone returned here again and again to remember. Or to hope. A file cabinet near the back is half open. Inside are more photos. School portraits. One stands out, Samuel and another boy, this one slightly older, taller. The name written on the back in careful childlike script, "Me and Arthur." Caleb stiffens. That's my dad's name. He rifles through more of the drawer. More photos of the two boys climbing trees, building a sand fort, sitting on the porch of a house that looks eerily familiar. The old house, Emma's house. Miriam's voice drops. Your father and Samuel were friends. Caleb nods slowly. They must have spent summers here. Before the family disappeared, Miriam finds one last envelope tucked inside the desk drawer, sealed with wax. She breaks it open. Inside is a single note addressed to no one. The handwriting is thin, frail, but familiar. If you find this, tell the truth. We weren't thieves. We were scared. Samuel was a good boy. He didn't deserve to disappear. It's signed, Arthur Holt. Caleb stares at the name mouth slightly open. My father wrote this. Miriam looks back at the photo of the boys. He never told you. He never told anyone. The light from the tower continues to spin above, casting rhythmic pulses of white over the walls. Miriam gently folds the note, slides it into her coat pocket. Roscoe waited for someone who remembered. Caleb looks toward the open door where the wind has quieted, and something almost like warmth seeps through. He waited for Emma. They descend the stairs. Emma is still seated in the entryway, the red collar folded neatly beside her. She opens her eyes as they return. Miriam kneels. We found the room. We found Samuel. Emma nods once calm. I know. Caleb clears his throat. Roscoe didn't leave because he was lost. He stayed because Samuel couldn't come home. Emma looks up at her father. But now he knows someone remembers. A long silence passes. The lighthouse dims, then dies. The beam flickers once, and goes out. Outside, the first stars begin to pierce the clearing sky. End of segment. The sky is clear for the first time in days. The ocean breathes slowly below the cliffs, no longer violent, no longer hungry. Just tired. Just still. The sun hangs low, staining the waves with a gold so deep it almost looks like forgiveness. Emma stands between her parents at the edge of the bluff. Her hair lifts slightly in the wind. Her hands are steady. She holds the red collar like a crown cupped, honored, weightless. Behind them, a small group of islanders gathers. Sheriff Hale, Mrs. Latch, 2 fishermen, a nurse. No one speaks. A photograph rests gently on the earth. Samuel and Roscoe, printed from the old image found in the lighthouse, now mounted on wood. A small bouquet of sea-thrift flowers trembles at its base. Caleb kneels first. He digs a hole in the soft soil, his hands surprisingly gentle. Emma steps forward and lowers the collar into it. Not like she's burying something, but like she's giving it back. Miriam presses her hand to Emma's shoulder, then lowers a seashell beside the collar, one Emma found on her first walk to the beach, before the storms, before the voices. No words are spoken, because they would only get in the way. Caleb stands again. His eyes meet Miriam's. Then both of them look at Emma, not as the child they tried to protect, but as someone braver than either of them were ever willing to be. She turns toward the sea, silent. The wind catches the edge of the photo. It flutters once, then settles. That night, the sky turns to velvet. Stars pierce the darkness one by one, hesitant at first, then pouring across the heavens like old truths finally breaking through silence. In the quiet of her room, Emma doesn't sleep. She sits cross-legged on the floor, her rabbit beside her, the window open to the cold. And then, a soft sound, a whine. She lifts her eyes to the open doorway. There he stands, Roscoe. His fur glistens, but not from rain. He is light in shadow shape and silence the suggestion of breath. His red collar is bright against the darkness. He walks to her slowly, no rush, no fear. Emma doesn't move. He reaches her, presses his nose to her hand. She lifts it gently, lets him lean into it. You're not alone now, she whispers. He licks her fingers. And then slowly, like fog retreating in morning light, he fades. Not gone, not lost, just released. A final exhale in a story too long held inside. The days that follow are quiet, but it is not the quiet of absence. It is the quiet of something resolved. Caleb takes long walks by the shore, not looking for explanations anymore, just listening. Miriam spends her mornings in the lighthouse, carefully preserving what remains, restoring what she cannot to reopen wounds, but to honor them. And Emma no longer flinches when trees creak or wind whispers. She returns to the forest, not to find Roscoe, but to remember with him. She speaks less. But when she does, the words are heavier, clearer. Like she's learned the language of things left unsaid. One morning, she helps Sheriff Hale hang a plaque outside the lighthouse, in memory of Samuel Greaves and Roscoe lost and then found. Below that, smaller, let no truth remain buried. The island breathes differently now, no longer haunted, only held. Emma watches the waves from the cliff where they said goodbye. She does not cry. She only whispers, "You kept your promise." And somewhere, maybe in the salt, maybe in the sky, a bark carries soft and far, but sure. End of segment. Night settles like a breath held too long. The fog rolls in slow and soft, curling through trees, sweeping over the coastline, like a memory returning to where it began. The island is quiet, but it's no longer the silence of loneliness. It's the hush that follows healing. The camera pulls back. From the tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. From the cliff's edge, where waves kiss the stone. From the lighthouse, now dark again, but no longer forgotten. And finally, from the house at the heart of it all. A warm golden light glows from the window. The curtains flutter gently. Inside, silhouettes move Emma and her parents together at the kitchen table. A candle flickers. A laugh, faint and real, reaches through the glass and into the night. The frame continues to retreat higher now. The island becomes smaller, but no less alive. The wind moves through it differently, like it carries something sacred. Remembered. A voice begins to speak, not booming, not dramatic, just present, timeless. Some echoes aren't meant to frighten us. They're reminders that even the love we lose finds its way back, in the shape of a dog, a forgotten photograph, or a child who never stopped believing. The clouds above the island drift open, revealing stars scattered across the black like a message scrawled in light. The house fades into the mist, only its warm glow remaining like a heartbeat. A promise. Then the screen fades to black. A single line appears slow and quiet, inspired by true accounts surrounding Oak Island, Nova Scotia. And beneath it, smaller still. Listen closely. Some echoes never fade. Fade out. End of film.